Gavin, James and Colin. I'm delighted to be joined today by Bernadette Phillips. Bernadette is a social scientist from County Waterford, and she's a good friend of mine from the general election where we met for the first time, and I found her to be incredibly engaging, somebody who cares about human rights and cares about the issues that affect real people in the world. And actually, to be honest, the only person that I met in that town centre that came across as somebody outside of the political system that wanted to bring a change that we all see is needed in Waterford and in Ireland. And so I felt that upon seeing that we have a new government being formed, that it would be a very appropriate time to bring Bernadette onto the show, introduce her to the viewers, and get her take on what this coalition means for us. You know, it's the first time since the Rainbow Coalition that we have a three-party coalition. And as our former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said, it's the end to civil war politics. So what does this all mean? What will it mean for us as people living at home who are wondering what's going to happen with our economy post-COVID-19, or wondering when can things get back to normal, or is this the new normal? Was the old normal okay? It's so confusing. But Bernadette, it's great to have you on the show. I'm so happy for you to be here.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here. Thanks for that lovely introduction as well.
So can you break it all down for us? What does it mean?
Oh my goodness me. What I will do, I was looking at this programme for government as I've read through it a few times now.
Right.
And it talks about a defining moment, for the country, and that we're facing the challenges and that touch every person, every community. So it's saying the right things in this, isn't it? As we go. It talks about well-being indicators as well as economic indicators. It talks about recovery. It talks about a balanced recovery. Okay, so it mentions all of those things. It mentions well-being. My goodness me, in a programme for government, you know. But I suppose what we have to do is unpack that in relation to the reality that means, and take it back to the formation of the government itself. I mean, we waited over 140 days after the general election to actually have a government formed, and in the interim of what was happening and the parties and coming together. And I suppose I was looking at the negotiations, and I was looking at who was included in it and who was excluded from it. And I believe in democracy. And first of all, I believe that every party should have been involved in the conversation. So I need to lay that ground rule for myself, so that I'm sharing that experience, because having been part of the general election, canvassing, listening to the issues that were there, the reality of people's lives on the doors that I spoke to, and the call for change, and in looking at the formation of it, the exclusion of Sinn Féin from those negotiations, though I was running as an independent, I believe in fairness, and I felt that was a shame that they weren't included. Okay, so from that premise, we go on and we have a formation now of the two old Civil War parties, as they're known, and the Greens. Okay, so bringing in a new kind of dynamic.
And did you ever see this formation actually happening, that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would come together in this way and now promise us change?
I did, actually. I did. I did. When you unpack what change means as well, change is an interesting word.
True.
Change can be negative or positive, you know. So when we call for that, we have to be careful what we're calling for. And I saw the formation of coming together, particularly Sinn Féin got a very, very sizable first preference vote, 24 point whatever %, which was massive. So it meant that there was a lot of people out there who were looking in a new direction for a new alternative. Okay, so they were voting on that basis, and equally for the Green Party, they were voting for change, because the transfers along the lines of transfer left included the Green Party, you know,
Yeah.
when people voted, because people were voting for a change. We've been looking at a decade of austerity. We've been looking at how detrimental that has been to people's lives, to communities, who, by the way, have not ever recovered from it. Okay.
Right.
We heard a lot about recovery, and we're in
Mm-hmm.
recovery mode from government, but there's whole communities that have never recovered from the austerity, from recession.
Mm-hmm.
So we were listening to that, and people were watching waiting lists grow. They were watching the housing crisis escalate, going up 300 and nearly 400%, you know, in a few years. And people were watching all of the health issues. And so they said, we need change. And so I was sad about that. So if you ask me now, what does it mean going forward?
Mm.
It means that we're still left with a lot of issues that haven't been dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people's lives that haven't been given a new window of change and opportunity. So while this programme for government talks about well-being and recovery and balanced regional development and these things, in reality, when you unpack it, I mean, I looked at it for the constituency that I could have represented, you know, Waterford City and County, and I looked at the southeast region, and I couldn't really see an awful lot in there in that programme for government for that region. So when we begin to unpack, and I think it's really important that we're talking to the listeners here and people, you know, or have an awareness about something or a consciousness about something, is that the devil's always in the detail, you know, and the detail's not in the programme for government. It's not even costed, by the way. Not even costed.
Now,
Okay.
Bernadette, so what would you say to somebody who's listening at home who says, you know, let's take them at their word? You know, as you said, and I would agree with you, the language that's in that agreement or that programme for government is quite positive. It talks about these different things that we need to address, addressing well-being, addressing a climate crisis through a Green New Deal. The language is there. So what would you say to maybe a younger person who listens to the show who says, let's take them at their word?
Actions always speak louder than words, Colin, and I suppose when you get to the stage that I'm at in life, you really know that that's true, you know. And what were the actions previously, okay, of these particular parties? What do they actually do on the ground for people in real terms? You know, and when they spoke about recovery, who and what were they talking about?
Yeah, we heard this language before, keep the recovery going. That's an old slogan coming back.
That's an old slogan. So the word recovery is not new. And when you begin to unpack the programme, there's not an awful lot new in it, really, okay? And there may be the Green New Deal, and there may be the hope or the aspiration for the 7% per annum of the you know, all of that to help things, you know, the
carbon emissions
and all of that. But in reality, what does it mean? Because that's what I look at for people's lives. When I talk to people, I say, what does this mean for real change for you? And when I talk about real change, I mean quality of life change. So I'd say to people, look at that. So rather than taking at the word, look at the actions.
Yeah.
Look at the previous actions as well, and see of the radical shift it would take for the government policies to change, to mean real change.
So Bernadette, looking at that word change, you really described it well when you said there can be positive change and there can be negative change. Now, you said that, you know, you've heard things on the doorstep. People, what kind of things are people looking for on the doorstep, actually?
Quality of life.
Right.
Quality of life.
Right.
Services that they can access. You know, public services I'm talking about here, because I mean, there's such a we've seen in COVID where there was suddenly a one-tier health system. And we've seen the potential of how that could work. But in reality, we will slip back into the two-tier very quickly, and we probably are now. So
thinking about that then, since we didn't get the change, maybe I shouldn't say we, the voters didn't get the change that they had hoped for. I'm wondering, what do you think of somebody, you know, you have a lot of experience in the world, you analyze these things from a social science perspective. Do you fear that maybe at the next election, given that people didn't get the change that they wanted, and given that so many voters would be so frustrated, that there might be a switch to something like a Brexit or Trump style politics in Ireland?
Well, that's always the concern, that it will take itself really, really way down to the other side direction. But the biggest concern is that people won't vote at all.
Yeah.
And I talk to a lot of people, and they won't exercise that wonderful right to vote, that wonderful opportunity to exercise that, because as I've heard so often over the last few months, even, what would my vote for? It's a really important question. I went out, I voted for change, but I didn't get that change. I didn't get the real change. And so it's about the quality of life side. So I would say that we have to have huge conversations at community level, because
Hmm.
change really happens at community level too, where people pull together, and this is what we're looking for, where we begin to unpack policies and what it means. And I suppose as a social policy analyst, that's something I've been around for a long time. They say, well, what exactly does this mean? And we need to be having those conversations with young people
Mm.
quite a lot, because a lot of young people they're coming to vote, but then there's a pullback again, because there's a
Hmm.
sense of disillusionment at the moment. And
Absolutely.
I suppose looking at some of the surveys that have been done on average of people, what do you think of this government? Well, actually, no, I really want a new election. So you know, that's a big response. That carries weight. But the other side of it is there's a government in, and they have put forward a program for government, one which I will continue to challenge.
Mm.
I will continue to hold them to account for
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
to. And I
Well,
think that's what I would say to people as well.
hmm.
We have to start holding people who make such statements on paper to account in action.
Hmm. Now,
Um, one of the
one thing I want to ask you about then is that during the campaign,
yeah,
Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they both said that they wouldn't go into coalition with each other. So there was
it is.
a breach of a promise there. So when you look at someone, it doesn't have to be necessarily a particular political person, but just any human being who makes a public promise and then breaches it for some sort of gain. Do you think that there was political games played there, that they breached their promise for political gain? Or do you think that maybe egos got in the way, that people wanted ministerial positions? Or do you think I'm too cynical, that maybe they had the best interests of the country at heart?
Um, you're being cynical, but you know, you be forgiven for cynicism. Okay, okay. Can I say that to you?
I think a lot
Yeah,
of young people feel that way, that there's a lot of
yeah,
gamesmanship going on.
yeah. And again, you look at the balance of power and where
Mm,
people come together, and they say, well, if there's another group that we don't want to include, well, then the balance of power that we've got to come together to connect. You
hmm.
know, and then
Hmm.
you begin to unpack policies and look at the two old parties. You begin to realize they're actually very similar. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
and
Hmm.
people have questioned, why aren't you merging? Because they have become very, very similar in policy and policy formation,
Hmm.
and one taking it up from the other and being able to move it forward very easily, because there isn't a huge change in policy that has to take place. So that's an interesting one. And policy is really important. And when I talk to people, and when I've been out there talking the highways and byways over the years, I've been saying to people, policy affects your life. And people say, what has policy to do with me? And see, it has everything to do with you,
So
because
let,
it
let,
dictates your life, and,
let's
and what you have and what you don't have.
let's get into the policy then. You penned a really excellent piece in the Munster Express that I saw online, where you said that the program for government left our region and our city and county shortchanged.
Yes.
So, for somebody who they've turned on RTE once or twice and they've seen we have a new Taoiseach, and oh, there he is standing up, and oh, there's his Taoiseach beside him. We know who he is. Oh, they've released this. Oh, they've released that. And they hear for the first time now us talking about that this program leaves all of us in the city, county, or region shortchanged. What do you mean by that expression that that we're shortchanged by the by the program for government?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we don't have a senior minister in the Southeast. Okay, so that's big because we don't have a voice at the cabinet table,
Yeah.
and that's always very important. And that's been an old one for years. And the other side is, if you look at the key issues that are really important to people, I mean, 24/7 cardiac care has been there for a very long time. We've been campaigning for years on it. That is not in the programme for government. We look at the North Quays development, big development, you know. I think there's a big announcement in the next day or two, you know,
Yeah.
that around that. And what happens next. And there's a lot of money and a lot of investment and a lot of funding that's required for that. But it's not mentioned in the programme for government. We look at the airport, which has been, I put up a post 35 years ago on the 8th of July. The first flight, Ryanair flight, flew out of Waterford. Ryanair went on to be a very successful company. But what happened to Waterford Airport? We don't have a functioning passenger airport. That's not mentioned in the programme for government, you know. So the plans for jobs. I mean, I think they mentioned 200,000 creation of 200,000 jobs by 2025 or whatever. I think in that programme for government. But what does that mean for the Southeast region, and what does it mean for Waterford? I can't see it there. And so we're shortchanged, and we don't have the voice of cabinet. So all the time we are, we're fighting to just to stay where we are. You know, that's not development. We're fighting just to access services that we should automatically have. That we should have a fair degree of opportunity. We look at the university, for example, you know, on the conversation of the merger and the technological university, which I challenged in the campaign, by the way, because I don't believe in the technological university. I believe in the University of Waterford,
right?
Which I think is really important. So again, we have a drain that's moving out of the southeast and young people going to other universities, other than in the southeast region. Now, they're all real issues that affect people's lives, because without the creation of jobs, without the proper health services, without the development areas that I mentioned, when there is a drain from that region, now that's not a balanced recovery.
Absolutely.
And the indicators are not there. So when it talks in the programme for government about well-being indicators alongside economic indicators, I would question straight away, where is the well-being for Waterford, city and county, and the southeast region, if we haven't got a fair share of the pie in relation to opportunity?
You made a good point in saying that, you know, we were shortchanged again. This isn't the first time. So, but as somebody who has grown up in Tramore my whole life, you know, when I was younger, my grandfather used to teach me about politics by showing me the local papers, and I could name you the people that I've seen who've been a minister for this or a minister for that over the years, but
yeah,
I haven't really seen anything done. So why like we have a city, why are we ignored on a systemic basis for so many years? Why?
It's a really good question. The answer is the jury is still out on that one, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. The other side of it is about having really strong representation, and in the main, I think that's where to look. The question mark on that, and the representation and the power behind that representation, which is why I talk about cabinet minister, you know, the strength of a voice that carries issues, and not to be afraid to call them out. And I suppose I mentioned that in my campaign again and again. You know, I call issues out. We can't just wait just for decisions to come from ministers. You know, we have to be calling them out. We have to be holding accountable. We have to be looking for transparency in things. But I think we need a lot more confidence, Colin, in our county, in our city, and in our region, for ourselves to say, hold on a second, that's wrong. We're not getting our fair share of this pie. Sorry, don't be greedy over there. Let's have a look at this again and see how we can slice it up to make it fairer. And we need to be saying that again and again.
Look, your track record on campaigning and activism, it's completely unquestionable. You've been out there fighting for the cardiac care for years, and a lot of people have to salute you and salute those who were out marching and out with the placards and organizing online and organizing locally. We have to take our hats off to you for that. Look, my grandfather, just to share it with you, I didn't plan to, but my grandfather a couple of years ago was on a trolley, and he and I used to, I grew up with him, and he and I used to always talk politics at the kitchen table. And I used to often say to him that, you're wasting your money with a private health insurance, that it's not going to get you anywhere. And he was like, oh, you're so young and naive and blah, blah, blah. And when it came down to the crunch of the matter, he went into hospital about 3 years ago now with a chest infection. And just a chest infection, nothing more, Bernadette. And he was 77 years of age, 76, 77 years of age. And he'd been on a trolley for 72 hours. And the last night that I went in to see him, I'd chatted with him, and it was around the time, it was actually, yes, it was nearly 4 years ago, because it was coming up to Trump's inauguration, and we were chatting at the trolley side about this. And I said to him, what did he think of that? And he said, oh, the blah, blah, blah. And he said, Colin, the hardest thing for me here is I just can't sleep. I don't have any privacy on this trolley. It was in like nearly from like that TV program Eeyore, where the nurses and doctors have their desk and that's where they do their notes and stuff. People were jammed on trolleys near the A&E unit.
Yes.
And he said to me, I just can't sleep. I have no privacy. I just can't sleep. And unfortunately, the next day, when my grandmother and I woke up at 7 a.m., she called the hospital to ask how was he doing, how did his night go, like this. And we only found out at that stage that he'd been rushed to high dependency and had a pain in his chest. And we don't really know even today how long he was on the trolley before nurses and doctors spotted him. And unfortunately, he died in the end with heart attacks in intensive care.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
So, that's an issue that hits home. And that's one that a lot of people in our region have unfortunately suffered the same way. So I'm just wondering, as somebody who's been so vocal on this issue for so many years, and as I say, we salute you for it, for pushing the issue and being active in it. What can somebody do who's at home now, who sees that this is the government and it's been formed? What change can we bring? There's no commitment for 24/7 in the program for government. What change can I bring? Does my voice even matter? I mean, how can, and secondly, how will you in your campaign with 24-hour cardiac care, how will you go forward now to hold this government accountable?
Well, I've always called it out as a human rights issue. It's a violation of human rights. We don't do 24/7 cardiac care. It's a violation of human rights if somebody's on the trolley for 72 hours in a country, awash with money, but where the money hasn't been steered in the right direction, and they're human rights issues. And I spoke about in my own campaign about taking it to Europe, as a human rights issue, simply because that's where it needs to go, and it's really, really important, because if for so long we've been asking for what is a basic right, what is an essential right. Waterford, by the way, for listeners, Southeast region is the only region that doesn't have 24/7 cardiac care. All other regions have it in the country, and we've been denied it forever. We've been promised a lot, but we've not received it. So it's a human rights issue. So I would say to people that, you know, the facility is always there to write to your TV, to write to ministers, to not be afraid to pen an email or a letter or whatever way comfortable that somebody is. But to start really realizing that that power is there for people to do, and not to just wait for somebody else to do it. Okay, so that's really important as well, and that we can be all amazing activists ourselves by action. And if enough power comes behind that issue, and also to support the campaigns, because the campaigns go on. And we've marched in our thousands, you know. I mean, I remember 12,000 people January, I think, 2019. We were all down, there's massive crowds of people calling for 24/7, and we're still here having this conversation about it.
Right.
There's something seriously wrong, you know. Like in the programme for government, it talks about the second cath lab. It doesn't mention 24/7 cardiac care. It doesn't. And we can have 10 cath labs, and without having 24/7 cardiac care, we're still going down the road to Cork or Dublin.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at that, because this is a good one to touch on. This Herity report that came out a couple of years ago said that
2016.
It wouldn't be justified that we have a second cath lab at the time. It was the outcome of that report. So where does that leave us? Like, what's the difference between a cath lab and 24/7?
Well, I mean, the cath lab provides all of the services that you can use. It's a facility. We have one at the moment, and all of that has the availability to be able to treat somebody. But it's caught within a time frame here. At the moment, it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, nothing on weekends. So we're shortchanged, to use my word, in relation to that service. Because once the doors close at 5 o'clock on Friday evening, a person is either going to Cork or Dublin.
It's a disgrace, to be honest.
Which is an absolute outrage. I mean, just actually think about it. And then the Hershey report talks about 90 minutes. 90 minutes, you know, that window where somebody needs to get to for treatment. It can't happen. If you take that for the whole Southeast region of 600,000 people, people live in many different places around that region. So access to that, you know, if you're in Wexford or if I'm over in Hookhead, you know, I have to get across, you know, and I have to be seen in Waterford before I'm transferred to Cork. So to be stabilised before I'm sent on. So there's all of those issues. So there's a lot of hours that are building up, and for every minute the heart muscle is dying.
Yeah.
That's the reality. So when we begin to take that down to the very crunch of that, to that very human experience, we can begin to see the injustice, inequality, and violation of human rights that is.
It's really, imagine the amount of pain and suffering someone is going through if they're being transferred to Cork.
Yeah, it's a shocking journey. I mean, and again, people have told me again and again of their stories, and I have interviewed people, you know, for radio, their stories of awful, you know, having to make that journey. And I met people on my campaign, you know, who talked about that, and their relatives, and all of the emotional experience that is, alongside the physical issue that's happening. But there's a lot of people's lives that this is impacting on. And so it's back to people. So when we're talking about programs for government, when we're talking about, you know, wonderful things laid out about well-being, when we're talking about recovery, when we're talking about equity and fairness, all of these words are in this program. You know, we've got to look our TDs, we've got to look our ministers, we've got to look our Taoiseach and our Taoiseach and whoever else in the face and say, what do you mean by that? What exactly do you mean by that? And we have to take that journey to those human stories to say, well, actually, that isn't well-being. That isn't care. That isn't fairness. That isn't equality. That isn't justice. That isn't human rights. And this is why.
Yeah.
And so we have to be willing to have those kinds of conversations and not be afraid to do so.
Hmm.
Because I think often, we can be very quiet, and we can, we hope we as you said, we take them at their word.
Mm.
But it's a long time gone to take anything at its word. It has to be actions speak louder than words,
Mm.
and they always will. So I would be saying to people, look at the action, look at the response, look at where is humanity in relation to any policy, any government policy. Where are the people? If it's not people centered, it's not a caring policy.
Mm. Bernadette, you mentioned there about the North Quays development,
Yeah,
and I've seen a lot of positive stories about it, that there's a plan to put in a shopping centre of some form out on the other side. And I think it would be great to see it go in. But at the same time, I'm kind of a little bit worried that it takes a little bit of the life out of the centre of the city in John Roberts Square. That we'll have a lot of, and we already have a lot of empty units there already.
I would
But
agree with
that
you.
but that we're kind of moving and turning. Nearly the middle of our city is going to become like the old inner city was in Dublin. That it's just going to become older and run down. The shops will be empty, or maybe full of pound shops or euro shops or whatever. Not being critical of those types of businesses, but just saying, from that perspective. But
Hmm.
so what do you think about the North Quays development yourself? Because it's kind of a head scratcher for me. I'd be happy to see it go in because it could mean a lot of jobs. But at the same time, part of me is a little bit. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is for me as well. There is that concern,
Hmm.
and I suppose all I have to do is look and walk through the city centre of
Yeah.
Waterford, to see that it is suffering and has suffered for a very long time. I
Hmm.
mean, I remember, you see, the city centre when it
Hmm.
was incredibly vibrant,
Hmm.
when it had shop fronts that were full of character.
Hmm.
It had that old style shop, and when it was a very busy place. So
Hmm.
I remember that. So I can compare to what I now see. And we have to support the high street development back in. And I mean, the conversation with the North Quays was equally that there was a shopping centre to happen, in Waterford, in the city centre area and all of that. But I think we need to be ensuring that the conversation includes city centre
Hmm.
and the impact that it's going to have. So it's not just sufficient for that development to happen, but it has to run parallel alongside development of the inner city.
Right.
And what we need to be doing with inner city is ensuring that we have people living in them again. I mean, years ago, when people had their shops, they lived over them, you
Hmm.
know, that was the old way of doing it. And what there was the community in a city centre. There was
Right.
a vibrancy that was there because people lived there, they grew up there,
Yeah.
families, raised kids. But we need to be having that again.
Hmm.
So alongside that, rebuilding, renewing, we need residential as well,
Hmm.
and places where people can go. Um, uh, we need the proper services that run alongside that. We need proper places of entertainment for people. We need a holistic approach to how we develop city centres.
Absolutely.
And Waterford desperately needs that.
Hmm.
Waterford City itself.
Yeah, the city centre. I agree.
The city centre. It's interesting when you go out into the county, and I've been in Dungarvan, and it's
Hmm.
quite busy, and it's very buzzy, and there's lots happening in the county. It's just for the city itself, and cities die
Hmm.
unless their soul goes out of a place, unless we have people that are there, that are living there, that it's a 24-hour experience.
Right.
um, and that we don't have at the moment. So you're right, in the sense about the North Quays, though I think it will bring jobs
Hmm.
from development point of view. That whole area requires something.
Yes.
It's lying dormant for years,
Yeah.
but if it doesn't run parallel to the development of the city centre itself, that I would have my concerns about that too.
And another thing that just came into my mind there, when you talk about the development of that side of the water, is that there There is a shopping centre in Ferrybank. That's nothing. I think only maybe a library is in there after all
That's
these
right,
years.
yeah, for
So
4 years.
I'm just a bit worried that we're going to build something and it's going to be empty again. That's my worry, Bernadette. And
Okay.
that that maybe even if things start to open up, that we lose that vibrancy in the city centre. So I think your point is right about that. But how would we do it? Do you think that maybe we need to try to have living space above the stores again in the city centre?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it.
Mm.
But certainly where people are living, where that actually experience happens. I mean, and it can be done in a way that people are sort of not all stuck in one or two rooms, small
Yeah.
families. I'm not talking about that. I'm
Hmm.
talking about proper spaces for people and
Hmm.
where there's proper community amenities for people. And that can happen within a city centre. It can happen, and it has happened around the world in cities that have regenerated themselves. And
Hmm.
it needs to be a regeneration, not just of areas, but of the actual city itself,
Yes.
the centre core.
Hmm.
So we need a regeneration project happening for the city centre overall. And watch what happens, because it's like everything else, unless we have a proper foundation, which is why I talk about the airport, where I talk about the 24/7 cardiac care and proper health services. We need all of that in place,
Hmm.
and then we work from there. So we take those very important issues, we give those the attention, we give those the investment.
Hmm.
So we're creating something where people want to come.
Yes. Hmm.
The services and amenities are there, the facilities are there, and build it. They say build it and they will come. Well, they will. But we have to look at what we're building.
Well, talking about building, we need to build a runway at the airport, an extension. Again, not in the program for government, and again, something that we've been waiting for 5 years now, I think. So, do you think that anything's going
Longer.
to happen with this, or is it an issue that's about to die, that this airport's about to completely close down?
Oh, look, there's so little in it. I mean, we talk
Yeah,
about programs for government are also aspirations.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
to think that
If it's not even
everything's
in
written
the
in it is not
aspiration,
going to happen. Well, that's my experience of previous programs for government.
yeah.
And much of what was written down didn't happen.
Mm.
So much of what isn't written down hasn't happened. It concerns me when it's not even written down.
It's not even in the aspirations.
It's not even there. So we as a people have to highlight that. And
Mm.
we don't need to wait for another election. We don't need to wait. We now have a government. If we're going to, I'm a great believer in working with rather than against, in respect of moving something forward. Say,
Hmm.
okay, we're calling this out. This isn't there. And
Mm.
why isn't it there? And there's many things in that program that I can take out and that I can use to facilitate a conversation
Hmm.
about recovery
Hmm.
and equity and fairness and equality and regional development programs. So there's lots of things we can take out there. So even though issues are not mentioned, we can use what is there to
Hmm.
generate conversation,
Hmm.
which is the approach that I will be taking in relation to going forward with this. So this is what you mean, and I can give you a very good example, Minister,
Hmm. Well,
of,
let me
of,
let
what,
me
can, of what can happen.
let me ask you one last question about the program for government before I ask you something about your own future. In regards to this government formation, I won't take it too personal, but we have a minister for older people in Waterford now. And you are someone that has served on the Older People's Council in Waterford. You are somebody who, as I say, you have a track record of standing up for people. It didn't matter what age they were, what they looked like, who they were, you really stood up for people. So you have a really good track record on older people's rights. So if the minister were to come to you looking for advice over a cup of coffee in the sitting room and said, Bernadette, what are the top three things that I need to do in this job? What should I be doing? What kind of advice or what kind of guidelines would you give the minister if the minister were to come and sit down for a cup of tea or coffee with you?
For older people.
Yes.
Yes, we have to look at the basic services that exist for older people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the facilities, the community services, the health services that exist. But also we have to deal with the stereotype around older people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really important one.
Mm-hmm.
Because stereotype very often reflects how policies are formed.
Mm-hmm.
If we think something about somebody,
Yeah.
well, then something's created on that basis. So I would be saying to her, have a look at what you really mean about older people, the attitudes that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
What is the attitude in anything that we're creating for older people? Because I'm a great believer in foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't get that right, because I've been seeing it through COVID, how patronized older people have been and are. Ageism has been huge around it. The kinds of conversations that all over 70s now must cocoon, you know. Doesn't matter if you're well, fit, able, agile, you know.
You could be healthier than somebody in their 20s.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a stereotypical way of treating people. And I would say, take a look at that first.
That's really interesting.
Take a look at the way the policies have been formed around the stereotype. Why do we think it's okay that older people should have this? And also, I would say, please go and speak with older people themselves. Don't just assume you know what they need. Go and have a conversation with people. And also that one size does not fit all. So when we're talking about, it's like younger people, older people, it's a label, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a bracket to put people in.
It's just, put around a bracket around people. People are individuals. And unless we begin to acknowledge that, then we're completely missing something hugely important. So I would be saying all of those things. And so alongside that comes rights. The right that somebody has to be able to access something at whatever stage and age they are, by the way. Okay. But when we begin to stereotype somebody at a certain age, we say all over 65s. The funny thing is, you know, when you get older, Colin, you begin to get these things through email or whatever that says, oh, and when people are retiring now or over 55s, whatever, you know, and you begin to realize it's steering you in a certain direction. What it's doing is putting you into a box. You know, it's saying, well, here you are, you're in this category now, and this is what you need. That just isn't right.
You need this.
I would be saying, have conversation with people.
You need this dual encrusted life insurance assurance policy.
Absolutely, you know. yeah. Before you toddle off this mortal coil, you know, here you are. You're going to need this. But you're on that way. You're on that road now, and that's just not on, you know. So I would be saying to any minister, and particularly around the older people issue, as you asked me, talk to people. What do they need? How do they feel? I mean, that's a huge piece of research that really needs to be done around COVID.
Absolutely.
How have older people really felt? I put a letter in the Times a little while back, just on that whole question of patronising and the sense of ageism and the cocooning issue, and breaking that down into individual lives. Because I was angry about what I was watching and what I was hearing, and also the decisions were being made for
you. Yeah, people's decisions were taken from them, and they were forced to do something.
And no, this isn't what I need, you know. And stay in forever and a day, you know. And while it was done under the guise of caring, I didn't always see it like that. And so those are the kinds of conversations I think any minister needs to be having about any issue. But for older people, because we have very much that stereotype and patronising mindset that has prevailed for a long time, that that needs to be looked at and build from there, build from the reality of people's lives and people's needs.
Do you feel that that the measures kind of took people's agency away from them?
Yes,
Mm.
yes, absolutely. And again, some people may have been quite happy to do that, and people are at different levels of illness and fitness and all of those things, you know. So
Mm.
to just give make a blanket decision for a whole group of people, because suddenly you are a very different person when you were 70 than you were 69. You know? It
The
doesn't make
logic,
sense.
the logic.
There isn't any. So, so what that has bred is quite a lot of fear
Mm.
in people.
Mm.
And you take away agency. And older people, in the main, are really good at abiding by rules
Mm-hmm.
and regulations. Kind of grown up through that system and through the education system that has a lot of rules and the authority figure. And older people have a lot of respect around authority figures. And so if somebody says, look, you have to stay in for the next 3 weeks, you know, a lot of people will abide by that.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean in reality for your life? You know, the very thing of just be able to get out and have exercise.
Mm-hmm.
That's a well-being thing. It's
Yeah.
a health thing.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody who was doing all the shopping, living their lives, being involved in a whole host of things, actually being a carer in their communities, and very often maybe being a carer to somebody in their own homes, which is another huge issue we could talk about. And suddenly they were put into this box, this bracket, and said, this is how you're to be. And so dependency on others came in. Now, I've been involved in the COVID groups. There's been fantastic work going on the ground in the community, collecting shopping, medication, you know, all of that. But for me, I think we need a much deeper conversation about that, what that means to individuals.
Mm.
I didn't see that in the guidelines, which came across as mandatory, by the way.
Yeah, they weren't voluntary.
But they said, oh, this is advisory.
Yeah.
But actually, they were spoken as mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a lot of older people heard.
Yeah. Like here in Sweden, there has not been a lockdown, but
Yeah.
but I have a bias because a lot of the media have attacked Sweden. But to be honest, it's a different context. Until you're in the context, you can't grasp it fully, you know. But
Yes.
and a lot of outside media from Washington or New York or even Russia or wherever have written pieces about the place. But there's a lot of trust in the government here. There's a very strong social contract between the people and the state. Doesn't matter what party you vote for, whether it's red, blue, centrist, doesn't matter. Everybody at the end of the election comes together and backs whoever's in government. And so there's a lot of trust. And people pay a lot of taxes here, so systems work quite well.
Yes.
But the government never actually had to do a lockdown because when voluntary guidance is given, people usually adhere to the guidelines, but they know it's voluntary. So, for example, if an older person feels well enough to go do their shopping and they feel like they do or they don't want to wear a mask, whatever their choice is on that, they do as they feel is in accordance with what they need. So it gives people a lot more freedom and flexibility, you know?
Yeah, what that system, first of all, trust is a really important one, because if we don't trust the systems, that's a big issue. And the other, what that takes out of it is the fear. Fear I'll be doing something wrong. You know, fear that my choice has been taken away, that my independence has been taken away. And it forms a mindset, because I know, talking to, you know, a number of older people, they're now challenged coming back out into the world again. You know, and that's a huge concern to me, because that's a shift in their own mindset about their own confidence levels of doing things that they were doing wonderfully for years.
It's nearly like a form of institutionalization, except within someone's own home.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a huge concern, because unless we have something that supports that to be unraveled, that somewhere holds on in a person, and so dependency is formed, and it's like everything else, that if we're afraid, if we have a lot of fear in us, um, um, we're going to challenge our own health,
Mm.
because our well-being is challenged. So our immune system will be challenged. So
Mm.
these things have a knock-on effect. If I'm frightened, if I'm stressed all the time, then my own physical well-being is challenged,
Yeah.
as well as my mental well-being.
Hmm.
And so we see a lot of that. So a lot of issues there to be dealt with and unpacked. So again, I would be talking to the Minister for Older People and saying, you need to be having a look at all of that.
Mm. You mentioned something there that actually, to pick up on, about mental health. I think that there's often a stereotype
Mm.
or a feeling amongst
Mm.
younger people that mental health is something that only younger people experience, or mental health issues are something that only young people have to deal with. From meeting older people during this lockdown period, have you heard anybody say that, gosh, Bernadette, I felt so down, or I felt so sad
Oh,
or
absolutely.
lonely?
Oh, yes, again and again.
Mm.
I mean, loneliness is a
Mm.
major issue for older people. Organizations like Alone, I mean, their phone lines, I mean, the amount of people that call to those lines, I mean, they were inundated with calls,
Mm.
far more than they normally are. And so that means that there was issues there for people, that there was fears, there was concerns. Loneliness is huge, and they're all impacts on mental health. So mental health is an issue for all age groups.
Mm.
And when we in society begin to engage with that, then we begin to engage with that with children from a very young age, and taking care of people and minding them, and not saying, well, that's not something that happens to that group of people, or that's not
Mm.
something that will happen to you until.
Mm-hmm.
But and also the conversation for younger people and older people to have together, to say
Mm.
we have far more in common about these issues than we actually ever
Absolutely.
realize.
Absolutely.
So you feel lonely, I feel lonely too. You
Yeah.
feel afraid, well, gosh, so do I.
Mm-hmm.
I find the world daunting. Wow, so do I.
Mm.
You know, and
Yeah.
to bring the wisdom and experience together of people's lives and having the conversations about issues would be very, very beneficial, I think, to our
Mm.
society.
I
It'll
think there's
bridge
a
a lot
big
of gaps.
I think there's a big disconnect or big gap between people from different age brackets actually in Ireland.
There is, there is, and when it's done, I was involved in the Silver Surface events for the last few years,
Mm.
and watching groups of people come together, and older people going into schools and having conversations, and maybe
Mm.
young people teaching some of the technology to some of the older people coming in, and them finding that they started maybe with something like that, and then it opened up into life conversation,
Mm.
and finding the common denominators with each other, experiences, like the mental health stuff, all of the stuff where somebody goes, gosh, yeah, yeah, we're not that different really, are we?
Mm.
I mean, just because somebody's 60, 70, 80, whatever, it doesn't mean that they're not feeling concerned about things, or fearful, or lonely, um, or that they still need to be heard and recognized.
Mm.
Young people talk
Absolutely.
about being invisible sometimes. Well,
Mm.
older people talk about being invisible as well.
Mm. We're in it together.
We're in it together, not being recognized as individuals, as people.
Mm.
Um, and that's a huge one. I mean, often some of the older people say, "Oh gosh, I'd love to have done that."
Mm.
If I had my time back, I might do that. And they say, "Well, hold on, what? Maybe we can have a look, and maybe you can do something about that now." It's not always possible. And one old lady will say, "I'm not going to be the ballerina now that I would have liked to be." But yeah, okay, hold on. But however, let's have a look. And young people have that too, and missed opportunity, or they're afraid to take an opportunity, or confidence is a huge issue for every age group,
Mm-hmm.
and not having the confidence to do something and to take a chance, to take a risk. So there are all kinds of conversations that younger and older people can have, and equally benefit each other.
Mm.
So I think as we're talking, we could be creating something here, Colin, that there's initiatives that can happen.
Yeah, it's possible.
And it's all about conversation, isn't it? It's just about conversation. It doesn't have to be any particular structure around that. It's just that people begin to engage and connect with each other, and they begin to see that there's more that they have in common than they ever realized.
Mm.
And I think that's a fantastic thing. So.
Well, thank you for coming on the show in very strange circumstances in terms of technology and stuff. I mean, we usually do our show in person. We record in the hotel in Tremor. They give us recording space, and we usually have our guests in person. So it's a bit strange. It's a bit strange to do it through this way. So I really am appreciative that you're so open and flexible to embracing this kind of form. I mean, it's strange even for me to be looking at it through the screen, but with each episode,
I've been having a lot of meetings over the last number of months with Zoom.
Yeah, and I think the whole world is getting used to Zoom and Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, we've been talking to everybody around the world, and actually that's been a really good thing as well, because very often people will say, "Gosh, we wouldn't have done it like this."
Yeah, no.
And there's massive benefit to it. So embracing technology, yes, absolutely.
Let me ask you a last question. So we don't really know when there'll be another election. It's impossible to tell how long this arrangement will last. But if it goes as it's supposed to, according to the calendar plan and the program for government, there would be local elections before the next general elections. And from what I can see, as I said at the beginning, you're somebody who's not from like the traditional political insider group who's been in the party all the way and worked their way up the party ladder to be able to represent the people. You're somebody that's actually been with the people on the ground. So if there was another election, local or general, would you consider putting your name forward for
it? I have to think about that. I have to think about what that means. I suppose we always have to think about the time in which that happens, and where my life is then. The life change and life circumstances. I suppose one thing I will always say that I don't have to be elected to be active in the community, and that's something I'll always be doing. For as long as I can draw breath and get out there and talk to people and write things, and so from that point of view, I'll always be doing that. And I think having been involved in the election, fantastic experience, by the way. It gives a different platform to talk about issues as well, So now I'm very interested in, as I mentioned at the beginning here, of holding politicians to account in relation to where we're going forward, and I suppose I've always been doing that at a level, so that won't change. But so, I don't know. I can't answer, because life circumstances may be different.
But no matter what happened, you'll be fighting for social justice in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, and I think that's always the bottom line. That where there is inequality and injustice, where somebody isn't getting a fair share of something, I think I'll be there somewhere, saying,
I hope
that's wrong.
I hope that I'll be there with you, Bernadette.
Well, I think you will, and I want to wish you all the very best as you go forward, and your own commitment around human rights and the issues that are really important to you. And I think at a heart level you get that, and I think that's really special. So I think you're going to do amazing things.
Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you. That means a lot, Bernadette. But thank you for coming on the show. I'm sure I'll have you on again in the future when there's something that is relevant or something that I believe that, you know, I need somebody who's an expert to get to the people and give them that bit of advice or give them that guidance or the motivation even just to look at an issue positively or look at it critically or whatever the angle needs to be. I think that I'll have you back again. So thank you for being on the New View, Bernadette, and stay well and stay safe, and hopefully I'll see you in Waterford whenever I get back home.
Well, that would be fantastic. And I would say to people out there, believe in yourself. If there's something that you have a conviction for and a vision for, don't give 1 second of doubt in relation to going with it.
Bernadette Phillips, thank you for coming on the New View.
Thank you, Colin.
Take care. Stay safe.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.